It's a pleasure to welcome onto the program Representative Khanna. He represents California's 17th congressional district, located in the heart of Silicon Valley. He is serving his third term. Representative Khanna is, of course, a Democrat, and for that, we're extremely grateful because it's fun to have on people from the other party and actually talk through the issues. Representative Khanna, thanks so much for joining the show.
And thank you for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, you bet. So let's talk about minimum wage because you sort of made the news last week when you were criticized for some comments that you made about the minimum wage and small businesses. The implication seemed to be that if businesses weren't paying a higher minimum wage, then maybe they didn't deserve to be in business. So what did you mean by those comments?
Well, let me clarify it. I am a strong supporter of small business. I understand the need for small business. I do believe in a $15 minimum wage. My belief is that the Amazons, Targets, Walmarts can easily pay that. But I understand that small businesses may have a difficult time in doing that. That's why it needs to be gradual. And that's why we need to have tax credits and other assistance to small business so that they can do that.
So let's talk about the actual policy, the actual $15 minimum wage. So I obviously am an opponent of the $15 minimum wage. When it comes to the minimum wage, there are a bevy of studies, including Congressional Budget Office studies, suggesting that it depresses employment, that for people who actually receive the minimum wage, of course, they get paid more. But for a lot of other people, it pushes them out of the job market because it is not like businesses actually just have a giant Scrooge McDuck money bank out back, and they're just holding a bunch of cash out there in order to somehow disadvantage their employees, that there is a labor market in which there are a lot of people willing to work for a particular wage and that they're paying the labor, essentially what the labor is willing to accept in order to work at these particular jobs. When you're talking about competitive job markets, especially at the lower end of the wage spectrum, isn't it true that there is a supply and demand issue that actually develops the wage? Or why do you think that it's artificially low, in other words?
Sure. Let me suggest the two places we disagree. Your view, as I understand it, is this is a contract between two free individuals. Why is the government, the state, getting involved in trying to set the price? My view is that in certain cases, especially where you have monopsonies, where you have a high concentration in labor markets, there are only a few buyers. It's not a truly competitive market. It's actually a market failure. And so you have a wage that is under the competitive market price. In fact, Milton Friedman in 1976 wrote about this possibility that monopsonies could distort the market wage. Second, and I think this is just a good faith disagreement, you would argue people have genuine bargaining power, and you have this concept of negative freedom, that the state shouldn't interfere. My view is that more of positive freedom, that people actually need basic support to be able to bargain effectively. And I don't think that there's true equal bargaining power often.
So there are a couple of issues that I see in some of the stuff that you're saying here, just on the specific level. Obviously, the vast majority of employees at places like Amazon are actually not making the minimum wage. The fact is that the minimum wage is only being made by something like 2.3% of all wage earners in the United States. About 50% of those wage earners are under the age of 25. And when you artificially boost the minimum wage, what you actually end up doing is making it harder for people who actually need the minimum wage jobs to get those jobs because you have artificially created a base in the labor market from which employers are going to draw. So in other words, a $15 wage is the kind of wage that you pay to somebody who graduated from college. It's not typically the kind of wage that you pay for somebody who graduated from high school. And you see this historically with the minimum wage. When the federal minimum wage was increased, then people who went to high school had a much higher employment rate before, and then the minimum wage was increased, and then the unemployment rate among high school educated rose dramatically. It is not racially equal that way, actually. Minimum wage increases have disproportionately hit black and brown people without college degrees, particularly. So why is raising the minimum wage overall a good idea?
Well, but you're right. Right now, maybe it's 2.3%. I take your word for the study, but that's at $7.25. And there are 30 million or so of Americans who make between $7.25 and $15. Now, I think the studies go both ways. Some people have argued, and there's studies showing that it increases productivity, it makes workers happier, it actually increases a business's profitability. I agree, there's studies showing that that may not be the case. One interesting study I saw is that what it really forces businesses to do is require high school as a credential. And this, a fair point would be saying that this may make it more difficult for those who haven't finished high school to get one of those jobs. But for 90% of Americans who have a high school degree, they will be able to get that job and pay more. So I guess the studies there are studies all over the place on this. My view is that the country would be better off with a higher wage that would help productivity, help the happiness of our employees.
I mean, the simple kind of rebuttal to that is if it really improved profitability for businesses to provide higher wages, then they would do it. Meaning you wouldn't need the government to actually step in and force them to do it, being that businesses are profit-driven primarily.
It's a fair point. That's if you believe that businesses always are acting in their rational long-term interest. My view is that sometimes businesses are very short-term focused and may not be making the long-term investments. But the second case is, let me ask you, are there any times you believe that the government should interfere? For example, overtime laws. We're required to pay time and a half. Would you support that? There are a lot of times that the state has made regulations to say that this helps the bargaining power and makes for a better labor market.
Yeah, and I'm very much against virtually all of that. I'm extremely libertarian when it comes to labor markets, particularly because I believe that monopoly is actually created by some of the regulatory innovations that people have come up with. In fact, I think there's a reason why big corporations have typically pushed for a higher minimum wage when it becomes clear this is going to happen, because you're right, Amazon can absorb that blow a lot more easily than the mom and pop shop that is down the street. It actually increases their ability to drive other people out of the market. If everybody is required to pay a higher wage, then Amazon can spread that out over the price of its products. It can spread it out over its 83% market share in like the book market. It can upcharge people on the product in a way that small mom and pop stores cannot. Increase in minimum wage obviously disproportionately affects places that have 3 employees as opposed to places that have 300 employees, of which 30 are actually minimum wage employees.
Well, you're right about that. And this is, you're right that the impact on certain small businesses is harder, and that we have to take action to help those small businesses. I acknowledge that point. I will say, though, that in small communities, rural communities, often you have the case that these are highly concentrated markets. And in that case, you have employers having a lot more monopsony power to be able to set the wage in not truly competitive markets. But to the extent that my comments in the past were not sensitive enough in the way I phrased it to the challenges of small business, I acknowledge that challenge. I agree with you that it's going to be much harder for certain small businesses, and we have to be honest about it. We can't, I want to engage in an honest conversation, and to pretend that there's small businesses that aren't going to be effective and that should be helped would not be correct.
We'll get to more with Congressman Ro Khanna from the 17th District of California in just 1 second. He's a Democrat from Silicon Valley. And let me tell you something about Silicon Valley. You don't want those people to have your data. Well, ExpressVPN is an app for your computer and phone that secures and encrypts your data, so you can have peace of mind every single time you go online. They build a secure tunnel between your devices and the internet by rerouting your connection through their servers. That way, your IP address gets masked and your network data becomes encrypted, so your ISP can't see anything you do. The app connects with just one click. It is lightning fast. It is the only VPN I trust because they use a trusted server. Find out how you can get 3 months of ExpressVPN for free by visiting expressvpn.com/Ben or clicking the link in the description below. It's super easy. See, check out my computer. See, here's ExpressVPN. It is open, and boom, clicking to connect, and it's going connected. So now I'm protected, and so is my data. That is the important thing. Protect your data today. Find out how you can get 3 months of ExpressVPN for free by visiting expressvpn.com/Ben or clicking the link in the description box below. And the other big problem with a federal minimum wage is that it is federal. When we were talking about setting one standard minimum wage across an entire country, where wages are extremely different in Mississippi than they are in California. In California, a $15 minimum wage in a place like your district, or a place where I was living until very recently, LA, you get a $15 minimum wage, that buys you like a 1-bedroom studio apartment. If you get a $15 minimum wage in Mississippi, that is literally the median wage in Mississippi. Right? There are states where there are wildly disparate numbers as far as what wages are actually worth in particular states. Why in the world would the federal government set a federal minimum wage that is so high that it is actually at or close to, I believe the median wage in Mississippi right now is $14.23 an hour. Why would they set a median wage, a minimum wage that is above the median wage in a place like Mississippi, when a minimum wage in California of $15 an hour basically buys you a candy bar?
Well, again, this is the debate about the floor. I agree with you. In my district, $15 isn't enough. And the question is, should there be regional variance? Yes. And then the question becomes, what is the floor?
We have a federalist system, so there's a real easy solution here, right? We actually have like cities and states, and they could do this sort of thing.
Right. But the question is, there should be a national floor. And now I'm saying the floor should be $15. Do you believe there should be any floor? Do you think, $7.25, I think, is unreasonable. For example, Cotton and Romney have said the floor should be $10. I think Holly is saying it should be $15, but for billion corporations, where would you set the floor?
I mean, there is a. I mean, unfortunately, there is a floor, and the floor is zero, and it's going to be felt by 1.4 million people who won't have a job come 2025 if we raise this to $15 minimum wage.
I guess my question is for you: would you support any national federal minimum wage at any standard?
No. I mean, I think free labor is able to bargain, and if you can come up with a case where you have an actual monopoly that is violating labor law in its attempts to cram down a wage on a person who's unwilling to accept it. First of all, we have an amendment to the Constitution that prevents involuntary servitude. And second of all, bargaining power is still a thing. I mean, the fact is that there are wages that people cannot charge because people will not take the jobs for those wages. I mean, that does exist. And by the way, if you're worried about wages being depressed, then there's a case to be made that one of the things we should be worried about is cracking down on businesses that are using illegal immigration in states like California, for example.
But what would you say to the argument for monopsony, which even Friedman argues? Now, in fairness, he says this is a rare case, and he was against minimum wage. I mean, just in fairness. But he says, look, there are cases where you have one or two employers in a town, and they're not charging a competitive price because you don't have the choice to go to 4 or 5 different employers. And in those cases, it's a market failure. That certainly seems as one case. And then we can disagree about negotiating. But I guess the broader point in my view, Ben, is because I believe in entrepreneurship, I believe in innovation, I believe in capitalism, I call myself a progressive capitalist, is when we're producing such incredible wealth, trillions of dollars in my district, the ability to have people earn a wage that allows them to live a decent life seems to be something that's good for our democracy.
Yeah, I mean, my counterpoint is that we are not producing incredible wealth. These companies are producing incredible wealth because they know how to run the business better than members of government who are, getting their salary from me, frankly, and from these businesses that actually are paying extraordinary levels of tax. Representative Khanna, I really appreciate you coming on the program, and it's great to have conversations like this. So thank you for reaching out, because you reached out after I think I noted something on the show about your comments, and so it's great to have you on to clarify your position on this, and I think it's really important to do it. So again, just want to thank you for your time.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you're having a very civil, reasonable exchange. The one place we agree upon is you said that I read somewhere that you believe rational debate is what's necessary in our democracy, and I wish we had more exchanges like this across the country.
No, I really appreciate it, and I certainly hope that you're not canceled for having appeared on the show. Representative.
We'll see.
Exactly. Representative Khanna, Democrat of California.
You were very civil.
Really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that clip from The Ben Shapiro Show. If you did, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you stay up to date on all of our future content.